Okay, hi everyone. Last class, huh? Can you believe it? Every semester flies by quicker than the previous one. It's a sight to be seen. Everyone doing all right? Stressed? You can see the light at the end of the tunnel? It's a train. No, I'm kidding. Does anyone have any questions or things on your mind? Okay. We have a review session scheduled. What's the date? What is it? Is that it? That's it. December 1st. Okay. I don't remember dates on my calendar. If I look, I'm sure you're right. December 1st. It's a Tuesday at 10 a.m. Which reminds me, you have to reserve a room, but I will take care of that later. Okay. No, not 10 p.m. 10 a.m. 10 a.m. in the morning. Okay, let me make a note to myself to reserve a room, so don't forget. Reserve room. Okay, very good. Any other question? Anything in your minds? Anything else? No? Okay. So this is our last class. And for our last class, we have a fitting culmination of the topic of takings. And we're going to be doing the case of Kelo versus City of New London, which is probably the most significant and indeed divisive cases the Supreme Court has decided in recent years. And it's divisive not just because maybe it's right or wrong about the Constitution. It's divisive because as a whole, the people across the ideological spectrum rejected this decision. Usually most of these 5-4 decisions, half the country loves it, half the country hates it. This is one of those rare cases where just about everyone hated the decision, myself included. So as a warning, I can usually cover most cases pretty objectively neutral. This isn't one of those cases. If you ever take me for con law, the Obamacare decision might be another one. But for the most part, I can do things pretty neutrally. This case was wrong. It distorted the text of the Constitution, and I offer that disclaimer at the outset. But I will do my best to charitably and accurately convey the majority decision by Justice Stevens. Okay. So let's start with a mini look back. And if you notice, we did this chapter out of order. The first case in the chapter was Kelo, and then it went to all the other, more complicated things. Well, I did deliberately spin it because usually by the last day of class, people aren't paying attention anymore, so I'll give them the easier topic, which is perhaps fitting. So we started were what were called regulatory takings, okay? And these are various means by which the government is able to affect land use without actually taking the property away. So let's go through each of the decisions we studied, right? Loretto, all the government said there was, well, you have to install this little wire in the outside of the building. Could they keep their house? Sure, they could keep it. Next case, it was Hatacek, right? The government said, you are not allowed to, you're not allowed to bake clay inside city limits. Do they lose their land? No, their land was there. They just could do something else. Go think of Penn Coal, where they discuss whether you can dig underneath. Do the courts say that you have to give up your coal mine? No. They said you just can't dig there. Okay. Think of Penn Central, where the city said that you can't build on top of the train station. Was the train station required to give up any land? No. They just couldn't do something new. Even Lucas and Tahoe Sierra, where they weren't allowed to build by the beach. Do they have to give up their land? Of course not. They just couldn't build something there. They kept their land in fee simple. Even in the case of Nolan, Dolan, and Kuntz, was anyone asking them to give up their land? No, they simply wanted them to pay or give something up in order to make an improvement upon the land. Those are all the regulatory takings case, right? Where deciding whether it's an aspect of the police power or whether it's an aspect of the taking power matters greatly. But the topic for today is not whether or not there's a taking. With Kelo, Suzette Kelo's house was bulldozed. There's no question her property was taken. The question for our final class reflects the question of public use. Can the government take it? In every single case we've done so far, we've presumed, in fact, I don't even think I mentioned it, that the government was acting in the public interest, whether it was the telephone wires or the TV wires, whether it was the eliminating the nuisance of the bakers, right? Whether it's preserving historical sites in New York City, whether it's maintaining, a line of sight to the beach, whether it's preserving the environment by the water. These were all unequivocal aspects of a public interest land use regulation. Where Kelo departs from those cases is that there was no allegation that Suzette Kelo's house was a nuisance or that was blighted. There was no allegation that Suzette Kelo's house had anything wrong with it. Rather, the public use in this case was very clearly stated as economic development. That is, the state wanted to use Kelo's land in a way to generate more tax revenue for the community. There was absolutely no allegation whatsoever that this was done as a way to serve some sort of clear public use. Indeed, the linguistic tactic the majority uses, and is very subtle but does it deliberately, is to shift from a standard of public use to a standard of public purpose. I hope you'll notice that when you're reading the decision. So the reason why it's so difficult for me to accept Kelo, among other reasons, is that it has to flatly ignore the text of the Constitution. Usually the text of the Constitution isn't really clear, right? Due process, equal protection, what do those things mean? But the phrase public use is in there. It's there. And to the extent that this decision, or decisions that preceded it, disregarded public use and treated as public purpose, represents a very flat renunciation of constitutional principles. This one's an easy one, right? But the shift from public use to public purpose, which again, Justice Stevens didn't start, but he very well may have completed, represents a massive alteration in how the Constitution protects property rights. All right. So any questions on this? All right. So first, let me give you a little bit of a primer on the actual text of the Constitution, which you can study if the Supreme Court chooses not to. So the Takings Clause, which we've studied at great length, has 4 components. And believe it or not, the only word that we spent any time on this class to date was taken, or in a different tense, taking, right? We've always assumed we're dealing with private property. In fact, that's usually the case. We've always assumed that the government was acting in public use, and in each case we decided whether it's historical landmarks or cable television, or whatever it is, there's generally something that promotes the public benefit, right, that people can share the benefit of. We haven't talked about compensation too much. It did come up in the Loretto case of whether $1 was sufficient to compensate the building owner who had to have that wire put on the outside. But today we're focusing on this idea of public use. Public use. All right. So where did I finish last time? Oh, Yolanda, I appreciate the honesty in the last day of class. Thank you. So, Yolanda, let me ask you a question, right? What if the government wants to take a piece of property and turn it into a road? Let's just say, they're building a highway, and the only way to build a highway is to go through this guy's farm. There's really no other way to go around it. You can't zigzag. There are mountains on both sides. How would the government go about building that road? No. What's the topic for today's class, Yolanda? So if the government wants to build a road through a guy's house, what would they do? Condemnation. What does condemnation mean? Okay. You always hear the expression like condemn property, right? What does that actually mean? Condemnation is another word for eminent domain. Condemnation is a phrase to refer to eminent domain. And what condemnation basically means is the government determines that a piece of private property should be used for the public use. Now, they can't just take the property like they would in some other countries, right? We have this built into our Constitution that if the government wants to take your property, they can only do so for public use, and if so, they have to pay just compensation. All right? So, Eduardo, what happens if, say, you're the farm owner, right, and the government wants to build a road going through your farm, and they say, hey, Eduardo, we'd like to buy your farm, this little strip of land for $1,000. And what do you say? Oh, you can refuse. And what happens if you say no?
Well, the government still can take it, but
what's the process by which the government takes it if you say no?
Well, it's called taken by Eminent.
Good. Now, can the executive branch, can the governor just come and take your property right away under your feet? What has to happen?
There's a process.
Okay. And who oversees this process?
I would say
the court. Right. This is the key aspect. So first, what always happens is the government tries to negotiate with the property owners. They try in good faith to buy it from the landowner and to make a offer, whatever it is, reasonable or not. But unlike most negotiations, or perhaps like negotiating with a godfather, they usually make you an offer you can't refuse, right? I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. If you say no to the government, say, okay, that's nice, see you in court. See you in court. And they begin what are called condemnation proceedings or eminent domain proceedings, where basically they go to the court and they say, hey, we've made findings that this farm is necessary to build our highway. We made, Chris an offer, Eduardo an offer. He rejected it. So we're going to condemn it. And the only question for the court is, what's the appropriate compensation? So in fact, once the court determines that a taking isn't a public use, that's it. You lose, right? You don't get to stop it. The only question for the court, as a finder of fact, is how much compensation is just. And the amount of compensation that's just is usually not really enough. It's meant to compensate you for your financial losses. It doesn't include sentimental costs, doesn't include pain and suffering. It doesn't even include moving costs, that you have to move all your stuff. It's merely giving you the fair market value for your lot. Okay, yes, sir.
Does that change? Like from the first time they come and say, we're going to make you an offer, is that, I would assume the fair market value is a lot higher.
So the interesting aspect is, if you say no to their first offer, it's hard for them to drop it later, right? Because if that was a fair market value in the first offer, if you suddenly lowball them in the court may be suspicious. So usually the point they give you, that's a starting point. But the other issue to keep in mind is lawyers, right? Even if they say they offer you $100,000, if you spend $20,000 challenging in court, you pay your own legal fees, you're now out $20,000. So even if you finish at the point that you start at, you're probably worse off with lawyers. And I think this is an aspect of why the eminent domain process is something people usually don't fight. When I say they make you an offer you can't refuse, going to court is generally a waste of time, right? You can go to court, maybe you can get some more money, but your fees for attorneys will swallow up whatever you lose. Okay, everyone with me so far? So generally speaking, historically, this power of eminent domain has been exercised by the executive branch of the state, which can then be delegated to the executive branch of the city, and usually these quasi-public-private corporations. For example, the New York has something called the Empire State Development Corporation. And this one, it's a New London Development Corporation, right? They're called corporations, but they're really these quasi-governmental, private, public entities that are used to decide which land they're going to take. Now, Chris, what happens if you're smart, right? They say, Chris, we want to build a road through your property, right? And you say, wait a minute, my land's not good for this. I have all these crops, the soil is loose. You should build the road over there, right? And you go to the court and say, Judge, you know what? Tell the government, don't take this road, take the road over there. It's better soil, it's better everything, right? What does the court say to that? And let's say you're right. Let's say you have a geological survey and you're 100% correct.
Don't they say that based on whoever made this decision in the first place, we should go by their ruling?
Yes. So as is often the case with land use, the courts do not second guess the rationality of the decision. Courts are not there to second guess why they chose to take a specific plot of land. That's not something the courts feel competent to do. This is no different than in zoning decisions where the court won't guess why they zone this place as residential and that place is industrial. The courts simply do not make these sorts of determinations. So they're not going to really question why they took the piece that they did. Indeed, the only meaningful teeth in the takings clause is a question of whether it's being taken for public use, right? That's the only meaningful restriction in the entire clause. Because whether it's public property, that's easy to decide. The compensation, right, that's a mathematical formula. And whether something's being taken, well, if they're actually removing your house with a bulldozer, that is a taking. So really the central component of the clause is the public use provision, okay? Now, let's see, Alex, why do you think eminent domain is an essential attribute of the police power? I'm sorry, is an essential attribute of state power. Why is it so important?
It gives the government the power to improve cities as they see fit.
Yeah, but why can't they then just negotiate like regular people? Why do they have to have this special Trump power? Why can't they just?
I mean, people can refuse and they can just be kind of screwed.
Well, if they refuse, pay more money. What's the problem?
Governments don't want to pay money.
Oh, I know they don't. But what property rights?
Yeah.
But what's the bigger problem? What if someone just refuse? What if no amount's worth it? What if they won't accept any dollar amount? Then what?
Then if they just couldn't take it.
So what if they want to build a road that goes through Chris's farm? Chris is the last guy who hasn't said yes, and he refuses. Can they build the road?
Yeah.
How? Okay. So this is what's called the holdout problem. The holdout problem. This is not limited to government, right? Whenever you're negotiating with a lot of people, let's say you need to build a road through 5 properties, right? First guy says, fine, I'll give you $10,000. Takes it. Second guy says, wait a minute. They already put $10,000. Let me ask for 15. $15,000, right? And each person can ask for more and more money because they're that much closer to the end. So if you're the last guy who needs to be bought out in order to build a highway, you're going sky high. You're going to hold out for $1 million. Why? Because unless they get your lot, they can't build a damn thing. This is what's called a holdout problem. And eminent domain is uniquely situated to solve this problem. Because rather than forcing the government to deal with people who refuse just because they get more money, the government can come in and use this power. And in many respects, the government needs to build roads. Right? Roads need to go through a lot of different places. The government needs to build various structures. Maybe they need to build a dam. And someone owns a land near a body of water. The state needs to build a reservoir for the people to drink from. So don't think, no matter how much you disagree with Kelo, that eminent domain is evil, right? It's not. In fact, it serves a very important and valuable power of the state to deal with these sorts of holdout problems that will arise in any sort of negotiation. The debate over Kelo, again, centers on what, in fact, is a public use. So the examples I gave you a moment ago, building bridges, building roads, building tunnels, building reservoirs for water, building, schools maybe. Historically, these are all things that would have been viewed as quintessential exercises of public use. That is, if I build a road, right, everyone's allowed onto it. Think about toll roads for a second. But generally speaking, if I build a road, the public has free access to it. If I build a school, the public can apply to it if they live near that area. If I build a park, the public can access that park, right? Ryan, what about railroad tracks? What if they want to use eminent domain to build a railroad? Is that a public use?
Passenger car, sure.
Yes. Why?
Because ostensibly anybody could ride the
What do you call that? The fact that anyone can ride a railroad.
public access.
But there's a phrase for it, begins with a C. You don't know it?
Okay.
Common carrier. Remember that common carrier? The common carrier. So when the government gives a monopoly to a railroad company saying, you get to build these tracks, they do so because they're common carriers and they're not allowed to turn away business. They have to accept everyone on equal footing, as long as they're paying the price, whatever it happens to be. Usually those are regulated rates. So even when the government transfers these rails, which were taken by eminent domain, to the railroad company, it's still public in the sense that everyone can access it. But think about the facts of this case. Land was being seized for the purpose of eventually, hopefully, allowing Pfizer to build a pharmaceutical research center. Tyler, were those pharmaceutical research centers open to the public? No, they were not. What if you tried walking into one of those buildings, one of those research centers? What do you think would happen?
Probably get stopped at the gate.
Yeah. So I got a story for you. So a couple of years ago, I was actually at a conference at Yale, which is about 2 hours from New Haven. From New London. Yale's in New Haven. And I had the genius idea of going to New London to take some pictures and videotape my experience. So first I went to the Kelo house. I'll show you that in a few minutes. But then afterwards, I actually went to the lot where Kelo's house was. It doesn't stand any longer. And I actually made a wrong turn. And I inadvertently pulled into the driveway of a, it was a military contractor. I can't remember which name it was. So here I am with my camcorder in one hand, driving with the other, filming. And I pull into this, was it Lockheed? I can't remember. It was one of these military contractors. I pull in, and I actually make a wrong turn. I was like, oh. And then this Jeep pulls in front of me. Like, oh, crap. And this guy, who was huge, pulls out. I was like, what are you doing? So I go, I'm a law professor, and I'm taking pictures and recording of the Susan Kelo house in New London, Connecticut. And he looks like, who the hell is this guy? I swear, this. Well, I'll get to why I don't have footage of this in a minute. But so he says, "Give me your driver's license." I'm like, "Oh crap!" And he blocked me. I can't get out of the way. I mean, I'm on the private drive, so I get my license, and he's like, "So who are you?" I'm like, "Look, I've been taking video of the Kelo house." He's like, "Let me see your camera." I'm like, "Okay, I'll tell you what. I'm going to delete all the things on my camera, and I'll show you the camera. So, and then you're leave me alone." He's like, "Fine." So I deleted all the film on my camera, and I gave it to him. He was like, "All right, whatever." He's like, "Don't come back." I'm like, "Okay, fine." So I was thinking to myself, wow, I'm going to get arrested for my property students. This is very, very impressive. So I don't actually have any video of this encounter because he made me delete it. I swear this actually happened, though. I'm not making this up. I was really scared because I thought I was going to get arrested because I was actually trespassing as a property professor. I know what trespass is, and I thought I was going to go to jail for you ingrates. For those who actually managed to come to the last day of class, I appreciate it. For those of you who didn't, well, they're lost. So anyway, but the short answer is yes. Had there been a Pfizer facility there, and had I walked there with my camera, I would not have been gained admission. I would have been thrown out and perhaps arrested for taking pictures of whatever Viagra facilities are building, right? But the short answer is the stuff that was to be built in New London, Connecticut was in no meaningful sense for the public use. The public could not enter a Pfizer research facility. It would simply be illegal, the same way I was nearly arrested for entering the place across the street. Okay, fine. So then how did the court go from defining a public use to defining it as a public purpose? So there are two leading precedents which are relevant, which discuss the nature of public use. So I have pictures of it or not? I don't have it. So the first one, and it's only mentioned in your case indirectly, is called Berman versus Parker. Berman versus Parker. Tyler, did you see in your notes the Berman v. Parker case?
Yeah.
You want to tell us about it, please?
This was
Was it 1950, whatever, 55, 56?
Yeah, this was in DC. They were doing redevelopment. And
Whoa, who is doing redevelopment? Let's be precise.
The government.
Yeah, this wasn't like a private contract trying to renovate. The government was doing redevelopment. Okay, so what happened?
And there was a holdout of the department store guy who didn't want to
Okay.
sell his property. And the court, Justice Douglas said that the whole has to, essentially for the plan to be successful, the whole plan has to go through and they can't leave this one area untaken.
Good. So what was the problem with this area of Southwest DC, where if you know DC is near the National Stadium, not too far from where it is today?
Was that, well, this was in 54, so I thought that was like the drugs and hookers.
Drugs and hookers. Well,
No, not where the Nationals play.
well, where this place is actually still a ghetto. But it's actually, I'll get to the point in a minute. What was the actual physical problem with the land on this spot in this region of Southwest DC?
Was it that most of the housing was beyond repair? So.
They said it was blighted. What does blight mean? You want to, Eric? You're laughing. What does blight mean? Poor. Is that what it means?
Yep.
Poor. How do you define that? Give me a better definition. You're not wrong, but give me a better definition.
Well, in their opinion, means dilapidated or not
Okay.
up.
So-
kept up.
Right. So simply stated, is it warm in here? Or am I crazy?
It's warm.
I think I had a heat on yesterday. Now it doesn't fit, so I'm going to respect take my coat off, which I usually don't do, but it's extremely warm up here. And this thing's always blaring on me too, which increases the temperature as well. Dilapidated. I'm sorry. Blight means, well, vaguely dilapidated, in poor condition. And usually you think of a dilapidated building, something in such bad shape that's falling apart. It's a public safety hazard. There's bugs. There's rodents. You know, it's got to go. So the city of DC, through their local government, decided that the entirety of a block in DC would be condemned by the government. Now, not all of the property was in bad condition. In fact, I have pictures I forgot to bring. I'm sorry. I usually put it on the slide. But I have a picture of the department store. And it was actually in pretty good shape. It was in pretty good shape. And he says, listen, my property is not blighted. How can you take my property if my property is in perfect condition? Now, the decision was by Justice Douglas. Justice Douglas is a name you should recall. He wrote the decision in Village of Belterra versus Boris. Remember that? And you recall that Justice Douglas made a point of saying that communities need to have open and space. You need to have like a holistic place to raise your family. Property rights, whatever. So Justice Douglas perversely wrote, Berman v. Parker and Village of Euclid, which were the two major property cases in the course of nearly 30 years of the Supreme Court. So the court upheld the taking of the property in Berman. And as Justice Douglas wrote, it's not for the courts to second guess which land the city needs to take. If they have this plan to convert an entire region to something better, then they ought to. And the courts will intervene. And it's in Justice Douglas's opinion that this phrase public purpose creeps into the U.S. reports. Justice Douglas didn't care much for the text of the Constitution. His most famous decision in Griswold v. Connecticut spoke of the penumbras and the emanations of the Constitution. So text is largely ephemeral, as it were. So Douglas said, if the public purpose is to improve an area and get rid of blight, even if that swallows up non-blighted properties, that's going to be okay. So one note on Berman v. Parker in light of Justice Thomas's dissent in Kelo. Berman was decided not even 1 year before Brown. Okay? Brown v. Board of Education, that is. One of the necessary consequences of the decision in Berman was that the state realized that the power to use eminent domain could be used to get rid of people they don't like. So the neighborhood actually where this taking took place was a fairly diverse neighborhood. There were Jewish immigrants, African Americans, Eastern European. Everyone was pretty much living together in their own little spot. But this was condemned and it was turned into what are now housing projects. And it's a pretty rough neighborhood. I've been by it just to get a picture. Not the best neighborhood. But shortly after Berman v. Parker, where the Supreme Court blessed the idea that any sort of neighbor that could be improved can use eminent domain to get rid of people, a phenomenon emerged that was called, and Justice Thomas notes this, Negro Removal, where entire areas in Chicago and St. Louis and elsewhere, the state used eminent domain to basically clear out black families. This is not a mystery. This was not hidden. This was actually quite overt. And in inner city areas that the real estate suddenly became valuable, entire neighborhoods were just wiped out clean. And one of the points that Justice Thomas raises in his dissent, which I think is pretty forceful, is that once you get rid of this public use requirement, there's virtually nothing stopping an eminent domain taking other than the political process, right? If you're politically powerful enough, you can tell your member of city council or your member of the zoning board, don't take our property. But what if you lack the so-called political power? Or as Justice Thomas cites, a case you know very well, footnote 4 of Caroline Products, the idea of these discrete and insular minorities, right? So the people who are least able to resist the forces of eminent domain are most likely to be the victims of eminent domain. I wrote an article once where I described it as the path of least resistance in front of the bulldozer. The government will take the land that's easiest to take. Whoever will put up the least fight. So one of the consequences of Berman, again, Justice Douglas couldn't give a damn about property rights, was actually make it impossible for poor people and minorities to oppose the imposition of eminent domain. And there's history, go through Thomas's dissent, where entire neighborhoods were just wiped out clean. So by removing the role of the courts to intervene in cases of unfair takings, the court also sanctioned this blanket Negro removal, as it was called. I have an article on this if you're interested in the Loyola Law Review a couple years ago, but it's a very, very distressing topic and one in which property rights and civil rights were shattered apart. That when there's a civil right like voting or something else, the courts intervened. But when it was a property right, court said, nah, never mind, not interested. They're all protected by the Constitution. This one's even listed there. Hell, most of them are unenumerated. This one's actually right there. So that's another reason why this case is so difficult to grasp, because it represents a wholesale judicial abdication of an entire structural protection of our rights. And there's really no other way to say it. So any questions on Berman? The second case leading up to Kelo is called Hawaii Housing Authority versus Midkiff. Josh, you want to take a look? What was Hawaii Housing Authority versus Midkiff? I think 1981 or 82 case. Oh, 84. Sorry, I was off by a couple years.
Basically, Hawaii had the statute that where fee title was taken from lessors.
What was the problem in Hawaii, Josh? What was the problem they were trying to combat in Hawaii?
They were trying to eliminate the social and economic evils of a land oligopoly.
What is a land oligopoly? What's an oligopoly? It's not a monopoly, right? Not like the board game. What's an oligopoly?
I don't recall exactly.
Yeah, right.
So ruled by a select few or a small class.
Exactly. An oligopoly is ruled by a select few. So one of the consequences of Hawaii's history, which is various with colonialism and this and that, is that on certain islands in Hawaii, ownership of land fell into the hands of very few families. And basically a couple families would sometimes own half the land on an island. So much so that it basically became impossible for anyone to buy a fee simple. It was impossible. Virtually everyone rented. Everyone had to rent. There was no way to buy. Did you do a case last year in Property 1 involving a car accident in Hawaii where they, remember this one? Where the husband transferred property to his kids so it could be taken? Does that ring a bell? Well, the reason why they were so keen on keeping that property in that case was because no one owned fee simple. In that case, the property owner actually owned a fee simple and was doing everything to keep it within his family. Anyway, it was actually mentioned obliquely in the case, which now it makes sense. So Hawaii said, you know what? I know how we're going to fix this problem. I know we're going to fix this problem, right? Jack, what did they do? What did Hawaii do to try and fix this problem of this oligopoly of land where a select number of families owned everything?
Is this where they just said that you can't, the state basically can't just transfer it to a...
No, I'm not talking about what the court held. What did Hawaii do? What was Hawaii's remedy for this land oligopoly? They passed a law. Jackson?
The statute,
Yeah, what was the statute?
the fee title was taken from lessors and transferred to lessees.
Yeah, what did they do? Explain that in simple words. What did the state do? What does that mean? If I'm living on a piece of land and I'm renting it, I have a lease, what happens?
Gave it to the leaseholders
Yeah.
Just gave title.
for just compensation.
Effectively what happened was Hawaii said, if you are renting this piece of property, mazel tov, now you own it. We're going to pay to take it away from the landlord and transfer it to you. I think there were some fees involved as well. I don't know the details, right? But effectively, this is like Stalin, or actually Lenin, right? We're going to take the land from the owners and transfer it to the people who are renting it. Straight up.
Just out of curiosity, when the state legislature was discussing this measure or voting on it, was there like a 24-hour period where how many lessors, the owners of property in Hawaii, effectively just issued eviction notices to everyone on the
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I'm almost positive that there was some sort of backstop to prevent that from happening. I'm not sure. If you want to look into it, please get back to me. I'm sure if you look at the Supreme Court case in Hawaii Housing Authority, go to the statute number and go look at the legislative history. I don't know. That's a very good question. But you can imagine that the oligopoly were irate. They were like, what the heck? Now, I think the short answer to your question is, I don't think this statute ever actually went into effect right away. I think there was a challenge immediately filed when the statute was signed. And if I had to guess, the statute had a thing saying this goes into effect in 6 months. Most statutes passed in Texas go into effect, 6 months after it's enacted. So I'm guessing it was something like that. So a judicial challenge was filed almost immediately after the law was filed. If I had to guess, I'm guessing, but I'm pretty sure that's how it worked. Everyone get that? So go back to Jack. Jack, so what was what did the court do with this statute, which effectively took the property from the landlord oligopoly and handed it to the tenant? What did the court do here?
You mean like I was saying before, where they?
What did the Supreme Court do in this case in Hawaii Housing Authority v. Midkiff?
Oh, in
Midkiff.
Kelo?
No, in Midkiff.
Oh, in Midkiff. Well, I mean, they just said it qualified as a valid public use.
Well, okay. The court in Midkiff explained, and by the way, who wrote Hawaii Housing Authority v. Midkiff? Anyone know? Just mention a footnote briefly. Who said it? Say it. O'Connor wrote Midkiff. O'Connor also dissented in Kelo. And she referred to some errant language in Midkiff that she wrote. Go figure that one. O'Connor was okay with the taking in Midkiff, which was far worse than anything in Kelo. Yet 20 years later, she changed her mind, I suppose. But the court upheld the taking in Midkiff, and they said effectively, you know what? There's a problem. There's oligopoly of land. There's no fee simple. The state is doing this for the public use. And, you know, in a limited sense, it is for the public. It's directly transferring land from the oligopoly to the people. Ryan. In some respects, but go ahead, ask.
I mean, really, that was the question, was how is it worse?
Is it?
They point out that as soon as they took the property from them, it had solved an issue that was plaguing the society. Whereas in this one, when they took the property.
Speculative.
What's that?
It's like speculative, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So, in many respects, the public use here was far clearer than the public use in Kelo. When I said it was worse is as far as something being egregious is taking from A and giving to B, right? This is straight up redistribution. Straight up. There's not even a pretense, right? At least in Kelo, they said, oh, we'll take this land and give this to development corporation, and they'll sell it to, you know, this company or that company, whatever. But here, it's straight up taking from A and giving to B.
Isn't it the land equivalent of trust busting?
What do you mean?
I mean, with a trust busting, you have 2 or 3 firms that control the entire market. They go in and break up the companies after the bail companies. For example, there's we have done it recently. But once a company dominates the market, the government can go in, break up the company, force them to create a sub-company, sell off. This Midkiff is basically the property version of a trust bust.
Is a trust bust a taking? Don't worry. The antitrust laws are upheld on the Fifth Amendment challenges, but you're on the right track. So effectively, yeah, they were trying to break up trusts, and these were actually trusts of property instead of trusts of stock. But in any event, Justice O'Connor upheld the taking in Midkiff, and she read public use to be public purpose. So one of the reasons why the reaction to Kelo was so stark is that this should not have come as a surprise. If you had paid attention to property to Berman, and if you had paid attention to property to Midkiff, the thing in Kelo, like Ryan alluded to a moment ago, wasn't that awful. It was like not quite as bad, I mean, in some respects. But in other respects, it was worse, plus or minus. So what happened with Kelo, though, is fascinating, and I want to actually tell you a little bit of the story. They're actually making a movie about this case, believe it or not. Originally, Brooke Shields was cast to play Suzette Kelo. That bombed out. It's to be a Lifetime movie. Thankfully, I'm glad it didn't go. You know, Saved by the Bell and stuff. But they're actually making movies actually being filmed in Canada now. I think in Vancouver. So maybe this time next year, there actually very well maybe a Kelo movie, which hopefully is not awful. But we will see. It's always the funniest question of who gets to play lawyers in movies. And I know a lot of the lawyers in the case go, oh, Brad Pitt will play me. It's not. They always say that. If it's not awful. Unfortunately, I think it might be, well, I won't prejudge, but low-budget movies about Supreme Court cases are bad. I was actually, when I was writing my book, I actually had a provision of whether there can be a movie made out of it. I'm thinking, oh, man, they're going to screw that up for everyone. It's never went that far. But I actually reserved the right to approve any script because I didn't want it to be an awful movie with my name on it. But thankfully, never had that problem. So this is Suzette Kelo. She lived in her little pink house. And in fact, that's the name of the book about it, called Little Pink House. And the movie we called Little Pink House. Kelo, though, insists it's not pink, it's Odessa Rose. Okay, whatever that means. So what happened in this case is that the city of New London was very economically distressed and had a number of businesses and other things that shut down over the years. And the town's unemployment rate was skyrocketing. And this town couldn't even pay its own bills. So they decided that they wanted to revitalize, is the word people always use, revitalize the waterfront area, which is right by the Long Island Sound. It's a very pretty area. I've been there and almost got arrested. So the city chartered something called the New London Development Corporation. And the purpose of the New London Development Corporation was to decide and create a plan of what pieces of property would need to be seized by eminent domain, and then, sold to willing partners. As it turns out, the company of Pfizer had a very strong interest in building a facility right by the water. And shouldn't come as a surprise, Pfizer made a $150,000 no-interest loan to the New London Development Corporation. Yes, the very company that wanted to benefit gave $150,000 to this corporation, no interest, no strings attached. So the New London Development Corporation decided that an area of the water right by the Sound would be the site for this, redevelopment. And they targeted Susan Kelo's house. And as you can see, if you can read the signs at an angle, it says "not for sale." She said her house was not for sale. Now I'll show you another picture. This is the lot. That's what I want to show you. This is the lot where Susan Kelo's house used to stand. It used to be right around here. Does anyone know anything awkward about this lot? Anyone see something weird? No, just raise your hand. Is it empty?
I mean, there's nothing.
What's that? What's that? I almost got arrested there too. So here's the second part of the story. You have no idea. This was a very stressful day for me. It was actually really bad. So that is the Italian Dramatic Club. This is a fraternal organization where the local politicos went to get drinks. And the guy who ran it was a guy named Valentini. We're in Godfather territory here, but the guy who ran it was named Valentini. And the New London Development Corporation, when they said that they were going to take this lot and turn it into a development, said to Valentini, we're thinking about taking your land. And Valentini, who again was very influential, said, no, you're not going to take my land. And the head of the Development Corporation basically promised Valentini on a letter that your land is safe. They said, quote, "It is widely and completely known that the Italian Dramatic Club is not to be touched by anyone." Okay. It is the understanding of every agency of the government. It is our complete understanding. Anyone who says otherwise is lying to the member of the club, and I will confront that person personally who is spreading that rumor. I'm reading verbatim quotes. It's a letter that was sent to Valentini. So you have this club, which is still there. So the second part I almost got arrested was I got there really early. It was like 7 in the morning. I think it was on a Sunday. So I pull up, and I'm actually standing in front, taking video and filming myself. And then this huge pickup pulls up, and I'm like, oh crap! And these huge guys are like, oh man, they were these members of the Italian Dramatic Club pull up in their truck. I'm like, okay, I'm getting out of here. So I quickly pulled up and I drove away very quickly, but like I was again trespassing on their land, taking pictures. So very stressful day. But those pictures I have somewhere, but they weren't very good. They were blurry. So the point here I want to stress is the entire process by which this eminent domain was designed, this entire comprehensive plan, couldn't have been so comprehensive if they needed to take this entire block except for this little corner, right? Why is that little house still there? And it's still there. I drove past it a couple of years ago. It's because those who lived there were fairly politically connected and were able to extract from the developer this promise that no one will touch their land. Susan Kelo, though, was not so fortunate. Indeed, she'd been living there for a number of years. There were others living there on the block as well. Some people have been living there for decades even. A few senior citizen residents who were living there forever. And the city said, we need to demolish your house in order to build something that will be more tax-worthy. So, as it turns out, this is a satellite photo taken in 2007, 2 years after the case. And you can see they're actually starting to clear out this lot. This half is still there. Curiously, Suzette Kelo's house was taken apart brick by brick. And they moved it. I don't know how the hell you move a house. I have no idea how you do this, but apparently it can be done. And they moved her house about 2 or 3 miles away. I also went there. That one, I walked up to the front door and knocked. No one was home. So fortunately, no trespass there. And they actually moved it to be a memory of eminent domain abuse. So the question now becomes, what's there today? Oh, that's what it looks like today, the Kelo house. So the question is, what does a lot where New London took the property look like today? It looks like that. It's a huge, empty, vacant lot. Indeed, there were rumors that feral cats have taken a home in this wilderness. I mean, and the grass is really high. Like, I didn't want to walk around because I was afraid of the cats. But you know, it was serious. It was a stressful day. Yeah.
Something been built in that other satellite image?
This is the place I almost got arrested. This was a military complex. I drove into by accident.
No, below the
No.
Lion Theater.
No, this was stuff that used to be there. It's now demolished. This is the most recent photo.
Oh.
Yeah, but if you see here, I can't remember the name of the company, but this was this massive military contract that they actually drove into. It's right next door to it. Scary stuff. So why is this lot where Suzette Kelo's home still vacant? As it turns out, in 2008, 3 years after the case, Pfizer pulled out the deal. They acquired, was it Merck or one of the other pharmaceuticals? I can't remember which one. They acquired another pharmaceutical, which had a facility a couple miles away. They said, you know what? Never mind. We don't need to build anything here. Never mind. Just kidding. Keep the $150,000 loan. We're done here. Nothing was built. The area is still empty. I was there. It's vacant. Nothing's going on there. Suzette Kelo's home is still bulldozed to the ground. Actually, they never bulldozed it. They removed the plight of being bulldozed. The proverbial bulldozer happened. So why? Why or how did this happen? Oh, Wyeth. I'm sorry, that was one. The Pfizer acquired Wyeth, so that they didn't have a need to build it anymore. In fact, one of the funny aspects is after this happened, a group in New Hampshire tried to use eminent domain to seize Justice Souter's house to build into a museum to commemorate property rights. That didn't go anywhere, but I thought that would be pretty funny. I think I would support that back in the day, but as it were. So let's walk through the opinion itself. And the opinion itself is significant for how it frames the issue, right? So first, the opinion discusses what cannot be done. So Brandon, can the government merely take from A and give it to B? Straight up redistribution.
No, there has to be a public use rationale.
Okay, good. So the court agrees, going back to a case called Calder v. Bull from 1790 something, I can't remember the year, and says the government can't simply transfer from A to B, right? Unless there is a public use at hand. So one of the first misconceptions about this case, and this is very common, is that New London took this land to give it to Pfizer. Okay, that isn't accurate. New London took this land with the intent to give it to Pfizer. Okay, you see the difference. And the one, they just gave it to them straight up. But as I said here, Pfizer never even acquired the land because they didn't have a need for it. So the court admits that it's unlawful merely to take from A and give to B. But what if they take from A and they give it to this development committee, and the development corporation decides who to give it to? based on what's called a comprehensive plan. Will, what's this comprehensive plan business? Is discussed throughout the case. What's a comprehensive plan? I like to use pink highlighter for the pink house. It's very fitting.
Just that it's a plan for the whole public. And that it's not simply just this person gets benefit here, this person gets benefit, but the whole public gets benefit as a whole because it's like all together.
Okay, good. So we've discussed the idea of the public plan when we talk about zoning. Remember, the city decides they want things to look a certain way. They have a comprehensive plan saying how things want to look. You want to have residential here and commercial there and industrial there. These are plans which are designed to state what a city's desire is. Now, Spencer, how comprehensive do these plans have to be?
I don't think they have to be extremely comprehensive. They just have to have a comprehensive character to it.
Are courts willing to say that this plan is not thorough enough?
I mean, I think courts defer to the city.
That's right. Courts defer. The courts defer. So in theory, right, we would want cities to have studies and surveys and have lots of expert testimony and lots of evidence. But what if the city writes a paragraph, one paragraph on a piece of paper, and it says, we want the waterfront area to be revitalized with business and commerce, and we want it to look really pretty. Jeffrey, is that sufficient to be a comprehensive plan?
More than likely, yeah.
He's right. He's right. So one of the rubs, and that was an extreme example, right? But what if another example is it says, Jeffrey, we predict that Pfizer will build a $300 million facility here and bring 1,000 jobs and contribute, $10 million a year to the tax base. And that's the plan. There's no proof that this will actually happen. There's no commitment from Pfizer. There's nothing written down. But they write down the plan. Will that be deemed comprehensive enough?
Maybe because you said predict.
It's a forecast. It says we forecast that Pfizer will build a $300 million facility here, create 1,000 new jobs, contribute $10 million a year to the tax base. We predict this will happen. We forecast. Will that be sufficient to be a comprehensive plan?
It's weak, but I think it would still be comprehensive.
Yeah, Mena? So I think the difference, I mentioned this last week, is for whatever reason with exactions, the court got scrutiny. Right? With the exactions, the first case we had was in 1980, whatever. We didn't have the history of Berman and the Hawaii Housing Authority. In those cases, Justice Douglas said, hands off, right? But exactions, which was a Scalia opinion, was able to put some teeth into it right away. I think someone asked me a similar question last week. The biggest difference, they said, well, you know what? We have some precedent that we can clear apart now. Let's make a rule. Whereas here, they were bound by old precedent. Yes?
I just want to know, because the important thing here is the public purpose. But I don't know why the public purpose is subjective or objective, because sometimes if I'm the developer and I want to take the property, I can say yes, even though I put the property to the private developer, but my purpose is public. But others say yes, maybe it relates to the public interests, but your purpose is just to make profits, right? It's private. So I think, so how to decide whether it's public purpose, because maybe there's a option between the public use and the private use. I don't understand very well.
So let me ask you this question, right? Her question was, whether something's a public purpose is quite subjective. I may think building a pharmaceutical facility is a public purpose, but he may not, right? So this is the question, right? The courts simply defer to the democratic process. The majority opinion by Justice Stevens says, I'm not getting into the business of deciding whether, in fact, this is a public purpose. If the government articulates something that sounds public, good enough. right? And this is a question I posed to Jeffrey a moment ago. They said, we predict there'll be a $300 million facility. It'll be awesome. There'll be all these jobs. Here, public purpose, right? The courts are not going to second guess that. Even if it's significantly unlikely that this thing will ever be built. There's actually studies in this that most of these sorts of eminent domain plans never actually come to fruition. And if they do, they never even reach the projected forecast. But think about it. If you're a government, if you're a member of the city council, right, you have every incentive to lie. You have every incentive to say, listen, this is awesome. If we take this land, we'll have all these jobs and all these new things. It'll be awesome. Right? Lego, everything's awesome. You have every incentive to do that. Why? Well, you're taking someone's land and you're going to piss people off. So you might as well make a big story of what's going to happen afterwards. Are you ever held accountable 5 or 8 years later if it doesn't happen? Of course not. Right? This is the aspect of government people don't get. When they make a decision that comes many years down the road, you reap the benefits today, and you're out of office by the time you have to be held accountable, which is a very common theme in government usage. So the comprehensive plan in this case was designed such that they wouldn't actually need to verify it. Okay. So the key linguistic move, and Nolly's question alluded to this a moment ago, is the shift from public use to public purpose. Now, Alejandro, what's the difference textually between a public use and a public purpose? Textually, what's the difference?
Well, public purpose would just benefit by the public use. They'd actually be able to use.
Ah, yes, and he used the correct words, right? A public use would suggest that it can be used by the public. A road can be used by the public. A tunnel can be used by the public. A hospital, a school, a park, a common carrier railroad can be used by the public. Alejandro, can a Pfizer warehouse be used by the public? No. So public purpose is much broader, right? So Greg, then what does public purpose mean?
Like the economic development and growth.
Yeah. What is a purpose of the government? Well, it's to help make jobs, to help improve lifestyles. So even if building a Pfizer facility isn't a use of the public that public can use, it's something that serves a public purpose. And by broadening this to a public purpose, the court effectively rips out any teeth in a takings clause, right? Chase, what happens if I wanted to demolish a Motel 6 and build a Ritz-Carlton? Is that a public purpose? Under the majority's reasoning, not under yours. Under the majority's reasoning, if I have a Motel 6, a seedy motel, I want to demolish that. So I want to invite Ritz-Carlton or Four Seasons to build. Would that be a public purpose?
Yes.
Well, why are you so hesitant? What's your struggle? I can see you're struggling.
Well, I mean,
How does the court define public purpose, Chase?
Have trouble finding it. One thing that is tripping about your definition, your hypo too, is you're not including the middleman that we have in Kelo as well. So.
Oh, well, the development corporation says we'll take the Motel 6 and we'll build a Ritz-Carlton. We'll invite Ritz-Carlton to build. Ritz-Carlton said they're going to build. We're going to just, take it and then hopefully they'll buy it from us. Is that a public purpose?
I suppose so, if there's a carefully considered development plan.
Yeah. What do you think, Tyler?
No, I'm gonna go yes.
Okay.
It's gonna, like looking at the broader side of it, if they're trying to do it for public purpose, it's gonna bring in a possibility of more money with the people that are coming in. I don't know how much larger this hypo, but they'll be bringing in people that can spend money. More money
So rather than just having one family paying taxes, you have all the hotel guests paying taxes, right?
I don't want to seem like I'm in this case, because I'm not, but.
You can agree. No, you can agree. Whatever your position you want. Okay.
But I think the difference in these two is one, you're taking a hotel and you're just making a bigger hotel.
Right.
Whereas in this case, they were taking a home and they were going to do something different. They weren't just building a different home.
Ah, so should it matter the type of what they're using it for?
It seems like they made that distinction. So like that example is a little bit different because they're not taking your home and just building a bigger home. Like we want richer people to live here.
Well, Ryan, let me ask that question. It's a good hypo, right? What happens if the city said we need to demolish these apartment buildings and build so we can develop McMansions, which can bring in more property taxes?
One, that would be very wrong.
Would it?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because one, it's not for public use.
Well, what's public purpose? We need more property tax for the school.
Well, like I said, I disagree with this case.
Well, yeah, but no. Accept is a given. The real. This is a 5-4 decision. So accept it's the rule of the law. It's the rule of the law right now, right? The city says, you know what? We need to take down these one-family homes. We need to build McMansions, make more property tax for the school. What do you think? Under Justice Stevens' opinion, agree or not, would this be a public purpose?
Is it part of a,
Yeah, they have a real comprehensive plan. But they even said every square foot of McMansion is more property tax.
well, then, under this decision, it probably wouldn't.
Yeah. That I think is a good illustration of what this case actually represents, whether it's the small hotel for the big hotel, or the small house for the big house, or the small house for a Pfizer warehouse. If the city can demonstrate with their comprehensive plan, and again, comprehensive plans don't have much comprehensive. They can be very loose, right? That falls under the rubric of public purpose by the majority.
I know you said before, standard reviews with properties not necessarily a thing they do, but isn't this pretty much akin to rational basis?
Oh.
Say it's not. It doesn't have to be the reason they're doing it. Just has to have a reason.
Oh,
public
beautiful.
purpose.
By the way, is that from Fight Club, that true?
Yeah.
I thought so. By the way, you know what a paper street is?
No, I do not.
This is actually referenced in the first case this semester. So in the movie Fight Club, it's Tyler Durden, was that his name?
Mm-hmm.
Lived on Paper Street. A paper street was actually used by map makers, right? Where they would draw a fake street. Why would they draw a fake street on a map? So someone copied it and they used also that fake street, they know they copied it. So it's called a paper street. They would always put these little fake roads. So actually, in the movie Fight Club, which is about fake stuff, he lived on Paper Street. Ah. If you go back to the first case when Valkenburg v. Lutz, it's Circle of Life thing, right? The very first case when Valkenburg v. Lutz, they actually was a paper street on the map that didn't actually exist. Go back and check it. It's in your book, very first reading. Anyway, see, it's all a circle. Not deliberate.
Like our midterm, the circle of life.
Something like that. So the short answer, though, is right. It's yes, it does resemble a rational basis. The government doesn't really need to articulate the actual reason why they're doing it, right? So the next question, though, and this comes up perhaps in Justice Kennedy's dissent, what if these reasons are pretextual? That is, what if the reason they gave isn't real, right? What if they said, yeah, we really want to do this, to attract Pfizer, but that's not really the reason. They're simply trying to clear out poor people.
You get under the majorities that the example used earlier, it was a paragraph description of what they thought was going to happen to the property. That would be sufficient for a potential comprehensive plan. So
Yeah.
that should satisfy the requirement.
So the majority decision basically said whatever they put on their statement of interest, right? Whatever they put on their plan, we're going to take it as a given. We're not going to second guess it. Justice Kennedy, who always the swing vote, concurred. And Justice Kennedy basically said, listen, this is okay, right? But if there's evidence that they're doing this for an illicit motive, animus, if you will, to use Justice Kennedy's favorite word from a different context, if they're trying to single out his favorite parties, there's a role for judicial scrutiny, right? So there's actually perhaps one limitation on the majority. Justice Kennedy says, yeah, this rational basis review is fine unless they're trying to injure a specific party. In which case there's a more stringent standard of review. They depart from that rational basis. Okay. So everyone get the majority and as modified by the concurring opinion by Justice Kennedy. Omar, what was Justice O'Connor's point in dissent? What was the thrust of her dissent?
Basically, they stepped away from the literal reading of the Constitution to basically know it's public use and defines public use.
Yeah. O'Connor says, look, this is a case where it actually gives you a rule of decision. Usually the Constitution does not. Phrases like due process and equal protection, these are vague terms. But it says public use. How can you go about doing public purpose? Omar, what's the court's answer at? Where does it get this public purpose from? Where does Justice Stevens find public purpose from? And before that? Berman. Right. So this is an interesting case, right? Where the Supreme Court trusts precedent over text. The Supreme Court follows what justices wrote before, rather than text the Constitution itself. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe Justice Douglas was wrong. He often was. Maybe Justice O'Connor was wrong. She admits as much, right? So why are we sticking to precedent that ignores text? The Supreme Court likes stare decisis, even if it's inconsistent with the actual text of the Constitution. So concerning Midkiff, right? She wrote that decision. So she has this odd dance where she has to kind of say, well, Midkiff was okay, but maybe there are one or two things there that that aren't correct. And she refers to some, quote, errant language in Midkiff. Errant language. She basically said she screwed up. This is the closest you will find to a Supreme Court justice admitting they messed up. Now, let's see. Back up top to Evan. Evan, why do you think O'Connor changed her view on this from the Hawaii case to the Kelo case? What do you think maybe motivated this change?
I think this case probably has more, it's more wide-reaching, more of a slippery slope.
What is it? Let's go back to the point Ryan raised, right? Which is worse, Midkiff or Kelo? What do you think? Which is actually a more egregious violation of property rights, Midkiff or Kelo?
Midkiff was, but
the Midkiff was worse. Yeah. So if O'Connor upheld the taking Midkiff, then why would this one be invalidated in her mind?
Why would this one be
Yeah,
invalidated?
if Midkiff's worse, right, then this one should be easy to uphold.
I think this one would probably really solidify it. Sorry, decisis, and they would continue to kind of go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, what do you think? She saw the light. Oh, she should have come to God moment, right? Short of a come to God moment, what else do you think may have motivated her decision?
I think that she's realizing, she's realizing that it's becoming too broad.
What are the consequences you think she saw of this decision? And this is reflected in her dissent. What does she see as potential consequences of the court's decision?
Not differentiating between private property and public property.
What may happen if this ruling takes hold?
Then that sovereign may take private property currently as ordinary private use and give it over for new ordinary private use along with the new private use to generate some secondary benefit.
Okay, good. So if you think about it this way, right? Berman, the DC case. At a minimum, there were actually blighted properties there, right? There was actually blight, and it's reasonable to say if you're demolishing a building where one room is not blighted, one room is blighted, it's very hard to demolish around one facility, right? So you could, fine. Why housing? Maybe you can say this was a really bizarre situation, right? Where else in America do you have this problem where a single landowner owns everything, federal government? But generally speaking, this doesn't happen in most places. Generally speaking, if you want fee simple, you can buy it. But this case hits close to home. Because in every single neighborhood in the United States where there's a low tax base, this argument can be made. So while Berman was maybe limited to things involving blight, and Midkiff was involved to things involving this weird oligopoly, right? This was big. And this can be expanded nationwide to effectively say any property that's not pulling its weight, any homeowner that isn't contributing enough tax dollars to the tax base, scram, get lost. And maybe this is what O'Connor saw as a distinction. We don't know why. I mean, maybe she saw the light. Who knows? Judges seldom admit mistake, but this is one of the few instances where they do. Okay, everyone get that much. Michelle, another point just O'Connor raises about the comprehensive plan is a so-called stupid staffer test. You know what this is? The stupid staffer test. This comes up a lot, and I want to make sure you know what this means. Stupid staffer. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. What is this?
Okay, so she's talking about when the trouble with the economic development takings is that the public benefit and into the public benefit are merged and mutually reinforcing. So there's no distinction between either.
Michelle, let me ask you this question. So if I'm putting together this comprehensive plan, right? And let's say the truth is, we really don't know if Pfizer's going to build something. You really don't know. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Am I going to put that into the comprehensive plan? What am I going to write into the comprehensive plan? Absolutely. So the real is, right, only a stupid staffer, right, only an idiot will tell the truth that the plan isn't that comprehensive. This is called the stupid staffer test, right? Only a fool would put into the legislative history the real risks of this plan. Because what's the cost? If they just lie, no one will hold them accountable for it. So this entire idea of holding that these tests may be, comprehensive plans can be checked is silly. Okay. O'Connor says that this is a state abdication of judicial responsibility, and you cannot refuse to enforce the Constitution. But wait a minute, Peter. I'm sorry, Stephen. Can't the political process put a check here? If this taking was really so egregious, then maybe the people could have thrown the new London City Council out of office next year, right? Can't we just let the political process shake this one out?
Good, but if you throw them out a year later, it's too late.
Well, so then you stop the next taking, right? If politicians make a bad decision, they won't do it again. Or when they're proposing and say, you know what, if you do this, we will campaign against you, we'll give you lots of money for out of office. Vote the bums out, as they say. Why is that not a sufficient remedy?
Well, because the first wrong is still not right, and then
But why do the courts need to be involved here?
because of the question of what is the public purpose.
You're not answering my question. Why can the court, usually the court simply say in zoning, we'll let the political process take care of it. We're not going to get involved. We'll let the voters respond if they think this sort of action is egregious. Why can't they defer to the political process here? That's what I love about law students. Everything you ever do is about courts. Any solution, the problem is sue them. Very often in government, the solution to a problem is vote for someone else. This is a lesson that's absolutely foreign to law students because everything you study is cases. But 99% of law is changed through the ballot box and administrative state, which is a different story altogether, not through the courts. Then, why can't we just let this go to the political process? Why can't the political process shake this out? And if this is such a bad idea, political process will stop it.
Is it because invariably it tries into constitutional rights of private citizens?
So?
Well, because invariably someone's going to say that the government isn't justified or is not permitted to take it. And even if you vote them out, that doesn't reconcile or solve the fact that someone can come in and do it again.
So Ben, why, if this is so horrible, right? Why can't the people amend their statutes? Why can't the people amend their state constitution to give additional protections for property rights, right? Why does the Supreme Court need to step in and impose a stringent requirement? Why can't the people, if they oppose it, amend their constitutions? So it'll never happen again.
Well, even if they do that, even if they amend it, this is sort of the Supreme Court giving them a blessing to do it. If it happens anyway, they won't stop it, or they'll allow it.
What do you think, Caitlin? Why can't the people, if this is so bad, let the people change the laws, prohibit eminent domain for public development, or for private development? Why can't the people just change the laws? Why does the Supreme Court need to interject in every single zoning decision nationwide that involves eminent domain? Why must the Supreme Court do this? This is the thrust of O'Connor and Thomas's dissent. It's there, I promise. What do you think?
Thomas talks about like a lot of the folks are fixing like poor communities and wealthier communities.
Will the political process fix this sort of a problem? Why not?
Because in different communities it would be handled in different ways.
This benefits people who have the power to this benefits people who have the power to make certain things happen, I suppose. And that lower income areas have a disproportionate amount of power to actually remedy it through the political process.
Who was able to spare their house from the bulldozer?
Powerful, yeah.
The Italian Dramatic Club. Who was not? Susan Kelo. So the point that dissent makes, and they make this, I think, quite forcefully, is that we usually don't let constitutional rights suffer to the political process. We usually don't let constitutional rights be defined by whatever majority vote says. Especially a constitutional right that's enumerated. It's right there in the Constitution. So the political process would fail the developers. And what about the argument that the states can amend their laws and amend their constitutions? Indeed, that happened. So in the aftermath of Kelo, 42 states passed some sort of law changing their eminent domain laws. In fact, this was the most wide-ranging backlash to any Supreme Court decision in probably 3 decades. Texas passed one as well. Alex, do you want to guess how effective these laws were? Who do you think would have the most to lose from these sorts of laws? Be more precise. Who uses this power the most, and who benefits from the most? More precise. Developers. Developers have every interest in the eminent domain power being broad. Why? They don't have to deal with homeowners. They can just buy them out, have the government take care of them. So it invariably happened in almost every single state. Not every, but almost every single state. The legislation that was passed through the legislative process was flawed. On its face, it looked great, but it had so many loopholes and carve-outs that basically nothing changed. This is often the case when legislatures pass laws, they do it to benefit constituents that care. Do the people really care enough to see that the precise details of this law are fixed? Not really. They're so happy enough to vote on whatever the amendment happens to be. Curiously, The protections that were the strongest were those proposed by the people. In some states, you have actually popular referendums. In other states, it's started by the legislature. I did an article on this, but the articles that the referendums that started with the people were actually much stronger. Those that started with the legislature were captured by the industries and were very much pro-developer. So in that respect, Justice Stevens is right or wrong. Justice Stevens says at the end of his opinion, well, if this is so bad, let the people change the laws, right? Let them amend their constitutions and give additional protections to matter of state law. Well, as it turns out, amendments were passed that were not strong enough because the same sort of political process that bulldozed the land on this property in the first place. So this is why I think, in many respects, Justices O'Connor and Thomas had the better argument, saying that constitutional rights should not be subject to the vote for these very reasons. Okay. In the remaining few moments, I want to dwell just a bit on Justice Thomas's dissent, where he draws a close connection between this urban renewal, or what can be called Negro removal, and eminent domain. And if you look at the legacy of this public use test, okay, over 60% of the people who were displaced were non-white. Many of them were low income, low education. And this was used as a means of slum clearance. So for all that the Supreme Court did in Brown v. Board in 1955 to help blacks in poor communities, Berman decided not even a year earlier did quite the opposite. And Thomas writes, when faced with a clash of constitutional principles and a line of unreasoned cases wholly divorced from the text, history, and structure of our founding document, we should not hesitate to resolve the tension in favor of the Constitution's original meaning. Any questions? Yes.
Maybe it was discussed and I just missed it, taking notes or something, but in the O'Connor dissent, she mentioned discussing Schmidt-Kidd for Berman. Almost like she was blurring the lines between was it the police powers of the states and eminent domain power.
Yeah.
So I always consider it as separate.
They are separate. That's the errant language.
Okay.
Yeah. They're different. Police power, no taking. Eminent domain, taking with compensation.
So just to be clear, there is a very separate line. There is no shared border, as you mentioned. Or something.
No, they're quite different. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you all so much for a great semester. I appreciate it. Thanks.